Hello, I'm Dr. Harriet Frad. Juliana Forlano is not here with me this morning, but she'll be back in full force next week. This is a show about the intersection of capitalism, race, gender, and all the intersecting aspects of our personal lives, because we are people in capitalism. We hope this program serves you well. It's brought to you by Democracy at Work. Of course, we welcome all of you. We're so glad that you're tuning in. We want your reactions. We want your criticisms, as long as they're not abusive. We're happy to have them. We want all aspects of your reactions to this show. And we hope that it can help you, because understanding is power. It's brought to you by Democracy at Work, and you help bring it here when you help us by listening and also by contributing on Patreon. The topic today will be, why Trump? Why has this fascistic element emerged? Why have so many American people voted for Trump? Now, of course, we have to understand that Trump has stolen so many votes. When he accuses anyone, Trump is actually confessing, because he tries to confuse his public by accusing others of just what he is doing. So when he accuses Biden of cheating and stealing votes and maneuvering so that people can't vote, we know that that's what Trump did, which actually means that Joseph Biden really won by a landslide. Because with all the cheating and stealing, with the closing down and dissembling of postal machines, with putting up fake post boxes, with putting polling places so far from Black areas that Black people can't get to the polling place unless they have super transportation, of throwing many people off the voter rolls, of having the kind of poll tax that they have in Florida, so that people who have committed a felony may have the right to vote, but then they have to pay their fines, which they can't, getting out of jail and having no opportunities, or very few, of course. It's fining people for the ability to vote. So with all that cheating, that Biden still won means he must have won by a landslide. An indication of this is that the Trump followers started to party their victory party the morning of November 3rd, when people voted. They were so sure that with all their cheating, they won, that they were shocked. And at this point, I think Trump believes, because he convinces himself, that if Biden won, Biden got away with stealing even more votes than he did. And he's outraged. But of course, on the other hand, the reason that Trump is pushing that there is stealing going on and the elections are fraudulent is because he's managing to collect. He has over 40 lawsuits. Well, 40 have been thrown out. He still has a few, because he hopes to get money. Most of Trump's policies and practices have to do with his accumulating more personal money. And he has raised well over $300 million from his followers to contest this election. And when all the cases are thrown out, as they seem to be all thrown out, then he'll pocket the money. So that's another reason he's contesting the election. But what is this phenomenon? Why Trump? Well, one thing that happens, there's several things. One is that when there is such a narrow band of choice, as there is with two capitalist parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, both depending on billions of cash dollars to run, and both having programs that favor capitalism and no economic choice, people go for whatever is the most outrageous, the most far out, and the most unfamiliar. And that was Trump, who doesn't obey any of the protocols, any of the rules, who makes his pronouncements to the public through his tweets, and also who manages to capture the outrage of a people who've lost their power to determine their government. American people don't have the cash or the influence to contest the lobbying that goes on. Lobbyists write much of the legislation. And so they just don't have the power of the fossil fuel companies, of the other polluters, of the people who want to take federal lands, of the pesticide manufacturers, of the huge agri-farmers who are taking over the land. What can they do? They can't. They don't. Also, in America, one of the reasons for the narrow band of choices is we don't have a socialist party. In Europe, where many more people vote than they vote in the United States, you can choose the Socialist Party, you could choose the Communist Party, you could choose the regular capitalist parties, you could choose a fascist party, right out there. Once I was in Europe during an election, I was in France, and you're not allowed in Germany any private money for elections. And if you do, you're thrown out. So what they do is the government gives each of them a certain amount of money and a certain amount of television time. They're not allowed to advertise on television. They can put up billboards, that's it. And so all the candidates, there were 8 of them running for the top position in France. Each of them spoke for a limited number of moments about their positions. But in the United States, we have 2 tendencies of capitalism. And people wanted something far out. That's why Trump. There's another reason, too, that I think there is a difference, as someone who is into the psychological field. I have found that people have 2 approaches to survival. One is their psychological survival, what holds them together as a person emotionally and psychologically, and another, their survival physically. And I've found over and over again, people choose psychological survival over physical survival. And I think that many of Trump's followers feel that their way of life is dying, and their importance as white Americans supported by a white man's family wage, men who can be the heads of households that run like a feudal manor, with the man having everything in his name and the woman working for an exchange of what she produces, an exchange of the cleanliness, of the order, of the child care, of the emotional care, of the sexual services, and then has a home in which to function like a feudal serf, had the land and produced goods, food, or whatever else that feudal serf and his family produced in exchange for that land and that opportunity to work to survive physically. Now, those people are dispossessed. The white male wage isn't paid anymore. The capitalist companies deserted the United States. Since we don't have a socialist party or communist party or an anarchist party, that was just allowed. In Sweden, you cannot outsource jobs. If you close a factory, you have to get every single worker a comparably waged job somewhere else, though it's cheaper for them to keep in business making something else than it is to leave, and they're not allowed to outsource. The same thing is true in Germany, the most successful economy in Europe. Capitalism holds sway over both parties here. And capitalists were allowed to leave, leaving millions of people without wages, leaving tens of thousands of little towns built around a factory that employed people vacant and dead, and wrecking the lives of so many, the personal lives, the sense of self, the sense of importance are gone. And Trump talks to these people and says, "You have been humiliated. You have been wronged. They have robbed you. They are a swamp." And even though he's telling them they've been conned, they don't realize he's the bigger con. They emotionally feel, "I was robbed." And he captures their emotion. And he gives them the alternative to say, "No, you are not humiliated." Just like Hitler did for the Aryan nation that was Germany, you are not humiliated by the loss of your funds. You are great, and I will make you great again, which is what Hitler did. And you are someone special. Your whiteness makes you special. Your maleness makes you a person in charge. And so millions of white men and women, the majority of white women did vote for Trump, yearn for the time when they felt protected. Women protected by the male wage, allowed to stay home and do the housework and the child care and the sexual care and the emotional care and the social connection for their men. And men being head of the household with earning power, with the financial power of the household. Now, both parties have to work. Women are stuck with all the housework in most cases and the child care, and if not all, the overwhelming majority. And when there's a pandemic, the at-home schooling, as well as the emotional solace for their family and the social connection with their family, with relatives and friends. They have that in addition to a lesser paid job outside the home. And they don't want to be on their own, even though the majority of American women are now single. They want protection. And Trump psychologically says, "You are important. You are the most important, and you will be great again." And that's worth being robbed for that message. It should be noted, Hitler did that for German white Protestant people. And it was a solace because they had been humiliated by an inflation that totally wiped them out. Only Hitler actually delivered a lot more goods. Americans can be duped while given nothing. Hitler invaded all the countries around him and then gave the homes of the people in those countries and the wealth of the people in those countries back to the Germans as long as they were Aryans, white Protestants, and German. Trump doesn't even have to deliver. But people are desperate. They're psychologically desperate. And they have bought the fact that they live in a democracy, but they know they have no choices. They may have a lot of choice of toothpaste, but they don't have choice of system. In fact, they don't have intellectual choice of system. No one teaches about socialism in school, either in public or private school. That has not been done. And so people don't know that there is an alternative. They just know they need one. And there's Trump a real alternative in terms of totally disregarding every protocol and doing things his own way and ignoring all the rules and regulations and expressing the rage and outrage of people who feel dispossessed. And so that I think they choose their psychological survival as important people over their physical survival. Because it's not only Black people who are suffering. There's 1,000 people a day who die of the pandemic and have no protection. 1 in 10 families in the United States goes hungry. About 30% of the nation is afraid of pending evictions. And that's not just Black people. That's white people. People are cut off and frightened. The rural counties that voted for Trump don't even have the internet, so they can't even educate their children with the inferior education that internet provides. And so they feel denied and angry, and they don't have another voice that has a platform they can hear that offers an alternative of system. So they voted for Trump, even though he is a buffoon. He's a showman. He's a con man. And the people conned are Trump voters, but they don't have an alternative. Now, as a little bit of a foretaste for what we will have next week, we will go over the Green New Deal, which is like the original FDR's New Deal, in that it creates an alternative in terms of public services and education, breathable air, clean water, adequate housing, all the basic things that have been commodified by capitalism to the point where they're unavailable. And yet none of them are really possible within the capitalist choices that we have. You would need a socialist choice that would do what FDR did so well. He taxed the richest people at 98.6% because he could say to them, better pay up or else your whole business will be gone. There'll be a revolution here. And it worked. For the first time, people got unemployment insurance. Wow. People got cheap electrical services through the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. People were connected electrically the way they never had been. People got Social Security out of a nation in a depression because, of course, the money's there, just like it's here. We have more billionaires than anyone else in the world. So if we took their billions, leaving them, let's say, with a couple of million, let's say Jeffrey Bezos, who has $200 billion and doesn't give anything and finances eavesdropping on his workers so that no union could happen. If you left him with $1 million and took 199.9 billion, that would be a start. And then go to all the others. Close all the offshore accounts so people have to bring their money home and have it be taxed. And if places like the Cayman Islands don't want to give up their wonderful banking options that hide money, tell them you want to be invaded by the United States? Of course not. They'll give the money. It's possible. What FDR had, which we don't have, is he had millions of people in the streets, organized by the Communist Party, the 2 socialist parties, and the CIO, the biggest industrial union ever, millions of people in the streets marching for jobs and benefits, in the farming areas, hanging judges that condemned family farms, fighting the National Guard in the streets for the right to their land. So we had the Farm Recovery Act so that they could keep their land. We had organization everywhere, black and white people together in the 30s, organized by the Communist Party, had tenant farmers unions, because tenant farms were not only farmed by black people, but by white people too. And they had fierce battles, fierce, united. There's a book about that called Hammer and Hoe. I think it's by Adolph Reed, who's a wonderful black historian. That was the reality, because when people organize, we are the majority. We have what they need. You could see it in the pandemic. They want us to work till we die because they can't make money without our labor. And there are still jobs in the United States that profiteering capitalists need you to work on. We are the majority. We have the heft of the majority of people. And if we united and made socialist demands, which if you look at the Green New Deal, all of those important things are things that socialism could deliver and capitalism will not deliver. And so I would like you to think about that Trump phenomenon. Those people aren't crazy or bad. They're angry and denied, and most of them will overlook his bizarre behavior, his outrageous stealing, because he restores to them a sense that they're important, a sense that everyone needs. In the rural southern areas that voted for Trump, the southern white areas, I should say, Case and Deaton noticed, those are two great researchers, that white women were dying before black women did, and dying at young ages, and that those were deaths of despair. The sense of self they had gotten as mothers and wives of white men who supported them are over. Now they have to work full time at jobs that don't provide them enough money to eke out a decent living. I should say that they say that a middle class, decent, not elaborate lifestyle in the United States costs $150,000 for a family of four. Now, the majority of American women are single. Only 3% of American women get $150,000 or more a year. They are what Hillary Clinton called the basket of deplorables. What kind of self do you think you have when you feel deplorable? When you feel denied? When all the happiness you see on television is purchased by some product? And Trump gave them a way to feel noble and important and the possibility of being great again. And it was a huge con. And he managed it. He did it. And that's why they voted for Trump. They had no choice of systems. Ever since the end of the New Deal, the Democrats have been becoming much more like the Republicans. And they have, because in an unchecked capitalist system, you get the best democracy money can buy. And that's what we have. And so we need a system in which we have a voice. And we have a voice because everything, all our basic needs are not commodified. Our need for clean air and our need for clean, healthy food, our need for shelter. Remember, about a third of America is afraid of eviction, and a tenth go hungry. A need for rest and restorative sleep, which means no swing shifts where people have to know at the last minute, like nurses' aides do, and people in nursing homes, whether they're working or whether they're not, at the last minute, night or day. A sense of security in reality is what people need and what the Green New Deal would deliver, but it can't deliver it without a mass movement. And now I want to tell you that there is hope. There is always hope. There are changes. A very famous person said, there are decades when nothing changes. Nothing happens. There are weeks when decades happen. At that point, he was talking about the Russian Revolution. But that can happen. At the beginning of the 30s, it looked totally bleak. By the end of the 30s, it happened. There were mass movements of millions of Americans. And so the hope is that we can unite together. And we can create a really democratic socialism with an American flavor. And we can have a Green New Deal. And we won't fall for a Trump again, even for those millions who did vote for him, whose votes weren't stolen. And I must say, in honor of the American people, there was a choice in this election between a neoliberal who wanted capitalism to continue to exploit people, but wanted to give back a little more. You know, it's the difference between, let's say, Jeffrey Bezos and his wife. I think his wife got about $45 billion when he divorced her, and she already gave $1 billion over to social causes, including Me Too, Time's Up, and several others. He hasn't given anything because he doesn't feel he has to. His role in America is making more for himself. We have to stop those kind of values. And we are the majority. And just as they did it seemingly out of nowhere in the 30s, we can do that too. That's the hope. And we're really glad that you're part of us, that you're listening. And if you can afford to help us on Patreon, that will be really wonderful so we can survive, because we are in this very frightening, unequal, savage capitalist system. But we too need to survive. So thank you to all of you for listening, and to your Patreons, our Patreon subscribers, for subscribing. And thanks to Brian Isom, who does the technical work here. And Juliana and I will be back next week to talk about the Green New Deal. So in case you want to look it up, look up Green New Deal on Google if you have access to a computer, and you'll see how wonderful the items that Senator Ed Markey and Congressman AOC, or is Markey a congressman? I think he's a congressman, that they drew up, which are things we really desperately need, and things that most Europeans have accomplished by the dint of their powerful socialist communist parties. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Till next time.